This morning's session is on place-based education, and it's important, and I got to remember this too, these are directional mics and you got to speak right into them so the videographers can pick them up and the people in the audience can hear you. We had some complaints from some of the workshops that some of the presenters weren't talking directly into the mics yesterday, and take Clarissa for instance, and I won't mention any names though. But we forgive her. We have a number of presentations this morning. I wonder if somebody if I can get a chair. I want to start off with the place-based education website that I've been developing over the last 5 years or so. I want to remind everybody too that there's kind of like a little native marketplace going on in the exhibit room right back across the hall all day today. A number of vendors have a lot of good stuff lots of good stuff to sell, so take advantage of it. We went to the roundtable discussion format, not by our design. The tourism conference banquet was last night, so they set up for that. And then the A and B camp number 1 is having a $5 lunch fundraiser at lunchtime today. And then our banquet is tonight, so you know it's just a lot easier to go this way than tearing up and tearing down 3 times in one day. So the secret password to this website is ankn.uaf.edu/Tlngit/salmon. And it's just like magic, you know, and you're into the house of treasures. I hope Dick talks about the Axe Handle Academy and the complete salmon, so it'll save me a lot of time. Can you do that, Dick? All right, thank you. We're going to limit you to 3 hours. He could probably talk about all of this because we've had a traveling roadshow here for about 35 years that provided the basis for the raw content for this page. But this one, the Math and Tlingit Weaving, we developed this project, Dick and Nora and I and Dr. Claudette Engblom Bradley over the last 8 years or so. We had a science curriculum development in Indigenous science curriculum development seminar here in Sitka in the summer of 1999. And UAS Sitka campus really supported us. And we had Tom was there, Dick and Nora was there. And during one of the field trips, we went over to look at the Dauenhaur basket collection that was collected by Doris Dauenhauer, and then it was sold to the National Park, Historical Park in 1970 or 71. It's an incredible Tlingit basket collection, and it's one of the best documented collections of Indigenous weaving. And we thought that would be an excellent resource for developing a math curriculum, so that's how it started. And we really didn't do anything until the summer of 2003, and we had a three credit graduate course Terry Rothkar came over from here, and she was the weaver. Claudette was, Nora was one of the weavers. Jan Criswell was one of the weavers. Jan, are you here today? That's Steve Hendrickson's better half. Just my opinion. And Claudette was the math instructor. Were you there too, Tom, at that one? Tom was there. So anyway, we're kind of like a ongoing, never-ending educational roadshow. But there's a lot of stuff here. From Claudette's part, it evolved out of a course that she did down in Four Corners. I forgot the name of the community. The website is here, though. She worked with Navajo weavers and developed a math curriculum on that, so we just adapted ours from that. But here's the basket collection that we're talking about. There's a book, too. Is Helen here? Are you selling the book at the market, Helen? Or Robbie, are you selling your book? Yeah, because it's all day, you know, it's running all day. It's a pretty nice book, but I was working on my master's degree, and it's, you know, the project, my master's project was multimedia presentations of Tlingit knowledge, and this is multimedia presentations of Tlingit knowledge right here. But I talked to the SDA folks. I said, well, you're working on this project. Why don't we just put it up on the web? And they said, well, it's kind of a lifetime project. I had them send the raw material to Sean Topcock, who, you know, did a lot of the work on this, the technical work, the IT work. And he had it up in draft form in, I think, a day and a half. Anyway, Clarissa will talk about maybe some of her perspectives from a weaving standpoint later on. Well, I know she will. We did this course again in the summer of 2005. I forgot what we called it. It was a place-based education academy, and Ted was there. Were you there for that one, Tom? Dick and Nora were there again. But Clarissa was the weaver for that session, and we had a bunch of Juneau High School math teachers at that one, and teachers from Chatham School District, from Yaktat. Turned out pretty good. Anyway, you could have time, you can go through this. This is really interesting. I don't know if any of you have ever come across this, but this is Native American Cybernetics, Indigenous Knowledge Resources in Information Technology that Ron Eglash put together. It's pretty amazing. This UPIC Star Navigator, that's one project that Claudette worked on. Here's a PowerPoint that Claudette put together on the 2003 course, Math and Tlingit Art. I guess it's an article, not the PowerPoint. But Claudette is just a genius, just a brilliant math teacher. And she's she's a member of the Scatagogy tribe, Connecticut. Tribe that the BIA is trying to screw over. They don't want any rich Indians running casinos on the East Coast anymore. Here's Terry Rothkar's. Terry, are you here this morning? Her website. Safari can't find her. Here's a 7th and 8th grade math teacher, a rubric that she developed from the Math and Tlingit Art course. And she was going to try to get here, but the Juneau School District has a real critical shortage of substitutes, so no teachers are allowed to take off on Fridays especially. And this person needs no introduction. You're going to talk about the handbook that you developed? Of course. Saves me some time. Here's that that course that the website that Claudette developed with the Navajo weavers. That's in here too. And we just stole the ideas. Of course, we had Claudette's permission, so everything's okay. You know, we're in compliance with the intellectual and cultural property rights. This is a little website that one of the students, she was a second and third grade teacher at the time at Riverbend Elementary School in Juneau, Lori Hoover. She's since retired, you know. These teachers, they retire and they're, what, 15 years younger than me. I'm jealous. But it was pretty amazing. We thought that these courses would or these units would really not interest. We thought it would be kind of weighted toward the girls, because weaving is so feminine and whatever. But the way it turned out is the boys really got into it. Terry developed this, this little system for teaching weaving, where they just used yogurt cups, plastic yogurt cups, and cut them, and then had the kids just use yarn to learn the different weaving patterns. But the boys really got into it. They're going at home, cleaning out all the even full yogurt containers, and then practicing, and they, second and third grade boys really got into this. So anyway, she, did this, according to the standards. Dick and Nora developed, with a teeny bit of help from me and Claudette, this annotated bibliography on Tlingit basketry. It's a pretty good resource. Forgot what's in the glossary. Oh, Lance Twitchell developed this electronic version of his electronic version. I got to give him full credit for the Tlingit Noun Dictionary. Just amazing he did it. And is it still up? Find out real quick. Uh-oh, it's not there. Lance has been working with my son, Ish, recently on the Tlingit Macbeth production. He just got back from the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., and he was Macduff. Ross. And he was their language tutor. Oh, this would be for sale here across the hall, too. The traditional Tlingit country map. It has a comprehensive listing of Tlingit tribes, clans, and clan houses, and I highly recommend this to anybody. You know, it's for sale for $8. It was produced by this guy named Andy Hope.
We got one in our hotel room.
All right. So it goes from Kathyak, which is in Yakutat Consolidated Country, Salmon Stream Tribe, south, all the way down to Willie Jackson's country. We decided to include them. So this is an electronic version of it. You can go to any of the sections. Oh, you can't do it that way. I was going to say, an American dream includes Teslin too. Deslin. Big Sinew tribe. Does anybody here resemble that remark? And here's us. Here's my clan right here. Siktakhadi, Khanhit, Red Clay, or Firehouse. So whenever Harold gets here, they'll be for sale out in the back room, and my book that Tom and I did, Will the Time Ever Come, on the first clan conference. There's only 40 left. You know, we got to do a small reprint here pretty soon, I guess. We did this weaving glossary. This was done originally by George Emmons in the basketry of Tlingit, originally published in 1903, transliterated by Nora. Some pretty good stuff here. So anyway, you get the idea, and you could go through this at your own leisure as you want. This is a really nice one. This was done by the late Henry and Claribel Davis back in the, was this 1974? Is it a project that came out of the Tlingit Language Workshop? Or did they just do it on their own? Henry Davis was the Native Studies Director in the mid-1970s at Sheldon Jackson College, and Claribel was, she was a long-time elementary teacher, and he developed this unit on the legend of the killer whale, the origin of the killer whale. And it was published by Tlingit Readers, one of the media dynamos of Alaska. Anyway, this was posted on the Alaskool network that Paul Onktuguk organized in the mid-90s. And it's on the Institute for Social and Economic Research, ICER, at University of Alaska, Anchorage. And, their funding ran out, 5 years ago? But ICER is still maintaining it. Thanks, Steve. Well, thanks, Steve. He's representing the University of Alaska, Anchorage here. Do you have any authority? Oh, shucks. You can see how the One Reel Wild Salmon Education Project started, and that evolved into the I Am Salmon Project that Dick and Nora hopefully will talk about a little bit when they get up here. Teachers teaching Tlingit, the native Tlingit language programs evolved out of this. This was amazing. The Juneau School District committed some of their own. This is incredible at the time. This is 6 years ago, Dick? They committed some of their foundation funding, their hard money, and they didn't rely on a grant to start this up, to show their commitment on this. And so what they did initially is they hired Dick and Nora to work with a cohort of teachers that wanted to develop Tlingit language or integrate Tlingit language into their core curriculum. And it evolved into the Tlingit language programs at Harborview School, Elementary School, and Gastineau Elementary School, and I think most of the staff is here, right? Would the guilty parties please stand up and be recognized? Cheese. Well, I think I've taken enough time. You guys get the gist of this. And we're not highly organized this morning, but everybody's going to do a nice job. Tom, would you like to go next? You ready? Tom Thornton.
Yake, Yanjit Gak, Yahatu Asak, Tlingit Kainach, Kagwantan Ayahat, Shit Kakwan. I was adopted by Kusatan Herman Kitka, and I'm very happy to be here and thank Andy and the organizers for inviting me to speak. I didn't really know what exactly to present, so this is going to be somewhat reflective. I have a much longer presentation that talks about research efforts, which I'm not going to go into, but I thought I would be reflective of my own process of place-based education. I think I skipped a slide, though. Hang on 1 second. Okay, I guess it's just missing. Last weekend, 2 weeks ago, I went to Celilo Falls, and I was teaching a course at Portland State University in the anthropology department, and part of the assignment was for students to go to an event that commemorated the inundation of Celilo Falls, which, if you know anything about it, it was kind of Grand Central Station on the mid-Columbia River, where all the peoples of the plateau and the coast came to trade and to gather. And it was inundated after they built the Dalles Dam. And of course the Columbia River is full of dams, but it was the Dalles Dam that was, the gates were closed 50 years ago, that flooded Celilo Falls. And so in a place-based education, you'd go out there to Celilo Falls and see what people had to say about it. And so a number of the students did make the trip, and I made the trip. And it was quite poignant because you had people who had been there prior to the time that the falls were inundated, and they were still naming places that they had fished, you know, giving the Sahaptin and some of the other names, and literally pointing in the air toward the Columbia River to these places which were now well underwater. And there was a tremendous sense of loss, of course, and but at the same time, what really impressed me, and I think a lot of the students, is the long-term view, which is that Celilo Falls is still there, and the dam is just kind of an interloper, and probably will not last. And we're now entering a phase where I think people are recognizing that removing dams is a good thing because they've wreaked havoc with lots of ecosystems. And the figure they quoted, the native people were quoting, was 20 million fish that were harvested from the Columbia River. Now they just get a couple of 100,000. So if they were taking 20 million in a sustainable fishery, how many were going through there? And what was that worth? You know, probably more than a couple thousand megawatts of energy. So anyway, to me this is a metaphor. To me this is place-based education, and my students got a lot out of it. In fact, I'm still reading their papers, and one of them commented that they went down to the river and there was a man showing how they used to tie the nets when they fished there, the dip nets that they used on the falls. In the picture you can see it. And he told the student to go down where the falls used to be, and it's calm now, and he said, just listen, and I bet you can hear them. And the student said, I think I could. You know, they used to be cacophonous, just absolutely noisy. Couldn't hear a person next to you. But he said, if you listen, maybe you can still hear them. And that's kind of the way I feel about a lot of the work that we've done, and really a lot of what I've heard so far in the presentations. There has been an inundation. In one of the areas I work, place names, you could say there was an inundation of foreign names that overlaid the Tlingit and the Haida and Tsimshian names. But they're still there, and that's part of what we learned. And more than that, the places are still there. And so if you get nothing out of what I'm going to say, I think that's an important reflection. And too often I don't practice what I preach, but in this case, it made a big difference to go out to the site. Okay, there's my title page. So I'm calling this the 3 R's of place-based education. And again, I'm kind of riffing off of a couple of other R's I heard yesterday. One was language, revitalization, restoration, renaissance, repatriation. Well, here's 3 more for thinking about place-based education: resilience, resonance, and respect. And Harold Martin, who's been a partner in a lot of the research that I've been involved in, particularly the Place Names Project, I'm going to invite up in a few minutes to reflect as well. Here's a testimony for place-based education that comes from my teacher, Herman Kitka. He said, we taught a class together in 1996 at the University of Alaska, and he came in the first day and he had written out a lecture about his own training, and you might say it was a place-based training. He talked about how he had received his instruction, and I'll just quote this one paragraph here. He said, all this teaching, my teaching, was done where our customary and traditional subsistence food supply was gotten. This teaching was what made each Tlingit a good citizen in each community. The young people learned to respect the land they live on. They also learned to take only what each family needed to make it throughout the year. We need to keep on teaching our children our subsistence lifestyle and our culture and religion. Without this teaching, our Tlingit cultures will be lost forever. So that's about as good a testament to place-based education as I've heard. I'm going to skip this because Andy went on for a long time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about place names, which has been my main entree into place-based education. Why study place names? There's lots of reasons. I like to point out 6. One is that every culture has them. They're a cultural universal. They describe, they distinguish, they distill information about the environment. They intersect what you might call 3 critical domains of culture, or 3 critical domains: language, culture, and the environment. They're kind of where they all meet, the nexus, you might say. A second reason is that they provide a unique window on the world, without which we'd literally be disoriented. Linnaeus, who was the great Swedish botanist who helped develop the Western taxonomy that we use in science for classifying plants and animals, said in Latin, "If you don't know the names, your knowledge of things perishes." And Ken Grant from Huna, is Ken here? Because he took Linnaeus and Tlingitized him. I love that verb, Tlingitized. He Tlingitized it and retranslated. He said, if you don't know the names, your Tlingit way of life will drift away forever. And it's a little better, I think, than the original, because there's that verb, the Tlingit verb in there of drifting away, which in some ways is better than the Celilo Falls inundation, because I think that's what happens when you stop using the language, when you stop getting a place-based education. It does begin to drift away. So I thank him for that. I think that's a big improvement on Linnaeus, at least for our purposes. Third, place names are artifacts and ecofacts, in the sense that they reveal important information about the cultural and natural history of an area. We tend to think about artifacts as physical things that we dig up, but a place name is a kind of a linguistic artifact. It's something that people place on the land, and it stays there. They tend to be quite resilient. You know, Sitka's still here. It's a little bit bastardized or anglicized, but it's still here. Sheet, Ka, it's still here as a place name. Fourth reason is that they're potent symbols. Okay, this is another quote from a Huna person, the late Jumbo James, used to say, every one of these names has a story behind it, and I know you all know that's true. 5 is the whole endangered languages kind of argument, which I heard was very well represented yesterday in the session. But I'll just say one thing about places is that a lot of general knowledge in a language is widely shared among people, but place knowledge is not necessarily widely shared. You have to go to the people who lived in the particular areas. So while almost everybody will know kinship terms or names for basic plants and animals, not everybody will know names for places in every area. It's something quite specific, and in that way it's a little bit more fragile. And then finally, native place names are just a lot more descriptive than the Euro-American names, particularly because here in Alaska there's almost an obsession with biographical naming. And just to prove it to you, I've got a Sitka name here. Is that descriptive? This is the name for Sitka Point. Driftwood Point. It's not bad, huh? I mean, I think you couldn't come up with a better name. And here's another one which has been mentioned a couple of times, the name for Mount Edgecombe, Llwch, but equally as good is the children of Mount Edgecombe, which are the little ones beside it. And again, that's when you look at that pattern of naming, and I've written about this elsewhere, it relates, it doesn't just name things, but it relates them. Talks about how they relate to each other. And Bert Adams was making that point yesterday about talking about Mount Fairweather and Mount St. Elias. Okay, I'll just mention a little bit about this Southeast Native Place Names project that we're involved in, that Harold Martin was the administrator. We began in 1995 with some grants from the National Park Service, later got support from the National Science Foundation to put some of it on the Alaska Native Knowledge Network website that Andy just displayed. I think the motivation was one of respect for land as, you might say, the most basic or fundamental subsistence resource, and also that names were resilient and resonant expressions and reflections of Tlingit values with respect to subsistence. And one of the quotes I like from the Goldschmidt and Haas report from 1946, there's a lot of, if you've read that report, it's now published as Ha'ani, Tlingit and Haida land rights and use, but there's a lot of little statements in there about this is the stuff we're not telling you because it would take too long. And it's almost like in every chapter there's somebody who makes this point. And in Cake, Fred Friday says, the native people know all the points and rocks and every little area by name. If I told you all the names of all the places that I know, it would fill up many pages. These areas were used so much that we were familiar with every little place. And I kind of wish we could have been there in 1946 and started our place name survey with Fred Friday. We might still be working on it. But we were able to document about 3,000 names from Cape Fox all the way up to Copper River and actually beyond. And on the Tlingit listserv, if you follow it, people are sometimes asking for names for Seattle and Anchorage, and I think they go all the way up, up to the Bering Sea. Down, I don't know how far. South America, perhaps. So all of these results that we did for the project, it was a collaborative project with each of the federally recognized tribes, and we had a little different working relationship with each of the tribes, but we transferred the results of our survey to them, and then what we're doing now is just putting together a summary to kind of say who we worked with, what we did, and some summary results. And I'm hoping this will be a very good resource for place-based education. And I think what I'll do now is just quickly go through some of the slides and highlight some of the people involved. On the far side of the screen there, I guess your left, that's a kind of a GIS shot, and all those red dots are places. So one of the things you learn from the project is that Southeast Alaska is covered with native place names. And in some places they're 10 times, 20 times as dense as the English names. Herman Kitka I want to recognize again because he was one of our important teachers here in Sitka, as was Ethel Mackinnon and Vida Davis. Robbie Craig, I'll try to mention as many names as possible, and also Al Perkins, who's back to us there. Here's a point that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and when we started this project, multimedia was just getting started, and of course everybody saw the potential of not just writing down names and putting them on a map, but being able to click on a map and hear a name spoken. And we generated a few working place-based cultural atlases, and those are on the Alaska Native website, and they're linked to your website too, right, Andy? And so you can go and use these resources, and I would say they're quite primitive, maybe by today's standard, and some of the slick production things I've seen. But one thing I'm proud of, and that Michael Travis really helped develop, was that I think the Angoon one in particular was quite faithful to what I would call Tlingit multimediacy. And so here's my idea. Multimedia education is not new. Tlingits had it well before anyone, and a lot of the art that you're talking about is a different medium of expressing things. So this blanket that Mary Willis Deshitan from Angoon is holding up is a map, really, of Sitco Bay. And the double-headed raven there relates to this cave that's over by Sitco Creek, Yeskatuku. And the shield refers to a stream. And of course, if you know Tlingit property law, as she did when she showed me the blanket for a reason, it's a kind of a title, you might say, or a deed of trust to the property. But it's also a multimedia education. And what always struck me, and I think it's one of the reasons why place is still so foundational in Tlingit, whereas among other groups, particularly in the lower 48, it's become more alienated, is because it is so intricately linked to all of these other media. And when we brought this computer program over to Angoon, I was working with Andy and Jimmy George, and we sat down, we wanted to show it to Jimmy's mother, Lydia George, who was a niece of Mary Willis. And she understood right away what we were doing. And she said, well, you know, if you're going to do this, you should have not just the name, but the story, the song, and the crest, the design. And she said, basically, that's our theory of multimediacy. And I think it's important to recognize this. It's an indigenous theory of multimediacy that is still quite powerful, it's still quite operational, and could be a major tool in place-based education. I think it's obviously utilized in the ceremonial settings to this day in all kinds of ways, but maybe not as much in other settings. So this is just give you an idea of the density. So you see here there's more Tlingit names than there are English names. Ken Austin, who's gave a very nice talk yesterday about Glacier Bay, Teishaki, highlighted another aspect of place-based education, which is that it's not just points on a map, but it's the points that are under the points. And he talked about these three names for Glacier Bay at the bottom, and the first one being Se Shuyi, which was when the glacier was all the way out by Icy Strait. And then when it receded, they gave the place a second name, Hatu. And then finally the one that it's known by today, that John Muir got mixed up on the map, Sit Iti Geye. And the last one too, I think I always use it as an example of how Tlingit can capture things that are hard to capture in English. Because when they mapped Glacier Bay, they had a native guide, I don't know who his name was, but anyway, he translated the name for Glacier Bay into English and it became Glacier Bay. And but really, it's the bay that's taking the place of the glacier because the glacier is receding. So the Tlingit name describes a whole geomorphological process that in English you really need a sentence to do. And so that's one of the capacities, I think, that Tlingit has that makes it very powerful in describing place. This is the Juno project, Auk Lake, you remember? So when you say Auk Lake, you're engaging in what is called a redundancy. Auk, you're saying Little Lake, right? Anyway, Nora was she was our local project coordinator here, and the late Cecilia Kuntz was one of our key people in this. And again, a lot of people thought, well, Juneau, there weren't that many native names, but we're able to document several hundred. Here's Nora again, and her mother, and Jeff Lear, who was very instrumental in helping me get my spelling right. And Dick, are you in this one? No, I don't think you were there. George Ramos in Yakutat, Sally Edwards, I think that's Lorraine Adams there, and David Ramos. So these are kind of work sessions that we used, and a lot of interesting stuff comes out when people get together and start talking about places and place names. Another thing I want to highlight is that we weren't the first people to work on this. Ethel Mackinnon and Vida Davis had worked with Ethel's father, Charlie Joseph, and also with Herman and some others to document and map Tlingit names. And so we were just trying to add on to what they had done, which was really almost 500 names in the Sitka area. And in Haines, Deishu, and Klukwan, they had done something similar. There's a wonderful 3D map that was made back in the early 80s, and it was on a placemat. That's where I got my copy. I think they put it on a placemat. And then, of course, the sockeye blanket is a wonderful kind of a map that also very closely follows that Tlingit theory of multimediacy. And if you watch the film Ha Shagun, that features Austin Hammond, I think you really get a sense of how this works. I've seen the film about 30 times, and there's still things in there that I pick up on. The one above that is something they're doing at Klondike Gold Rush National Park. Klondike Gold Rush National Park is a place where they really kind of erase native history after the gold rush. It's sort of like the natives were the packers, and then the train came in, and that was the end of native history. And one of the things that has come out of an ethno-history project up there is to produce a native geography of the Chilkoot Trail area. And Lance Twitchell, is he here? No. Lance Twitchell was very involved in that, and I think it's going to turn into something quite nice. So anyway, there's lots of other things happening. And then I want to end with a couple of slides of cake. One of the fun things you get into is themes, and one of the themes is raven names. There are raven names all over, and the one on the left they call Yeshkawut or Yeshkawudi, these ravens' beads, and they're actually fossilized fossils embedded in limestone. And a guy by the name of John Palms got very interested when he saw this place name, and he took his boat down to Saginaw Bay, Skanach, is that right, Harold? Yeah, and found the beach and came back with these, and then did research on the whole geology behind it, because they're quite unusual to find. And there's a reason why they're remarked upon. But of course, there's a whole story about Raven making a necklace and so on with the beads. And then something else, I think for place-based education, you might say, Keith Basso says this, that in working with Apache, that they kind of work on you, places work on you. And so sometimes when you're not thinking about them, they'll come back. And this sometimes happened in interviews with people. One of the people we interviewed was Harold's cousin, George Davis, who's quite knowledgeable, but he lives in Juneau, so he's away from Cake, and he couldn't remember places, and he kept apologizing. And then he went home, and he went to sleep, and he woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this place, and so he drew it on a piece of paper, Yethkutchki, Raven's mat, I guess, right? And then later, Mike Jackson, who was our local support in Cake helped organize that study down there, took us out, and a student of mine actually, Norio Matsumoto, took a photo of it, and looks just about how he pictured it, doesn't it? So anyway, that bothered him, and I imagine he probably has a file drawer full of other ones that have come back to him since we did our interview, because that's another lesson. There's always more. And then here's the one in the project in Cake. Ruth Demert, is Ruth here, was local coordinator for the project. And is Ruth here? Oh, I thought I saw her. No. She worked a lot with tapes, some of them by her grandfather, Johnny C. Jackson. And Clarence Jackson was also involved in that. Mike Jackson, pictured here, Gladys Acevita. And so we've put some of the narratives in this final report, and one of them begins with this place called Cake, the little nostril of Cake, and you can see that hole there, that nostril, and that was one of the first places that they talk about settling in the Cake area. And it's maybe here I'll stop, and I want to bring Harold Martin into it because he's really been my partner in this, and I want to tell the story about Harold because he was always apologizing to me that he'd forgotten all these native place names. And on the way down to Cake, when we were doing the survey, he said, you know, we kind of buried our culture in Cake, and he told me the story of Cake Day, which probably a number of you know, where they literally kind of put their old culture in a box and nailed it shut. And so I don't know whether he was just trying to lower expectations or what, but we got down there and we started one of these group interviews. I think it was at the senior lunch table. And I think it was Kelly James we were talking to, and Frank Gordon and some of the other elders. And they started mentioning names, and I noticed Harold was moving his finger around on the map and pointing to it, and then I would mark it, you know, and this happened about 10 names. And then finally I said, wait a minute, Harold, I thought you said you forgot all these place names. And he said, of course I didn't. I grew up with them. And to me, that there was an object lesson in that, which is that there are a lot of people, I think, like Harold, who really do have knowledge of place names because they got a place-based education, like Herman did. They went to these places and they got used to hearing the Tlingit name, and it was only later that they stopped using it. So it's kind of there, but like Celilo Falls, it's buried under a whole lot of water or a different cultural tide. And I think for him, they still resonated. When he heard the name, it came back to him. So I want to invite him up here now to make some remarks about the project. Harold?
I'm a grandson of the Kagwantan clan. Kochkiish yichat dosak. Taktintan chatsiti. It could hit takakachiti. Yes, na. Yanidi yadi ayachat. Kagwantan dachchan. I'm not sure what I can add to what Tom's already told you. I graduated from Western Washington University in 1980. I went back to school in my old age. I did my graduate studies in University of Alaska, Juneau. And in 1982, I went to work for Central Council, Tlingit Indian Tribes of Alaska, as a tribal operations officer. In 1994, I became the subsistence director for Central Council, and I also became the president of Southeast Native Subsistence Commission. It was 1994 when Dr. Tom Thornton came to me. Tom was working with the Subsistence Division of the State Fish and Game Department at the time, and talked to me about applying for a grant for a Tlingit Place Names project. While we talked, it suddenly dawned on me that our elders were leaving us at a rapid rate, and every time we lost an elder, a tremendous amount of knowledge went with that elder. And so we gave the okay for him to apply for the grant. In 1995, we received the grant from the National Park Service Historical Preservation Funds. And we hired Tom Thornton as our project manager. As he said, I administered the grant. Our first project was to go out into the communities, and we met with the IRA councils for their permission to do a research on their lands. We got permission and blessings from every community we went to. One of the things, like he said, the most efficient way to do this was to put a chart on the table and have the elders gather around it. And like he said, we jarred each other's memories and then came up with a lot of names. I think one of the things we realized was that we're almost 30 years too late at that time. 30 years earlier, we could have talked to a lot more elders that were very knowledgeable in Tlingit place names. We have names for everything. We have names for creeks and rivers and mountains and bays, and we just had, places of significance. And while I was growing up, it never heard my dad tell my mom that during our seining season, never heard her say, we're going to go to Saginaw Bay. You say, it's always in Tlingit. So you get to know these different names of different places. One of the things that impressed me was that there was still a lot of protocol in the communities. We talked to certain people, and they would say, they'd tell us about the different places, and when we asked about a certain place, they'd say, well, I can't talk about that. This belongs to that certain clan. So they showed they still showed a lot of respect for each other's territories. I'm going to try to cut this as short as I can. This whole project wasn't without humor. Tom likes to get the correct pronunciation for a lot of things, but there are some words that were tongue twisters to him, and it would come out like a reference to a certain part of the human anatomy. And some of it was, some of the things it's kind of obscene, like I tell him, don't try to say this word in public, okay? And our final, during my work with on subsistence issues, the state agencies and federal agencies point to a certain part of the and say there's no evidence that this area has ever been used for subsistence purposes. Well, when we complete our project, there's in every territory from Craig, Tlawak, all the way down to Yakutat, there weren't any places that wasn't used at one time or another. You look at the maps, every part of Southeast was used at one time or another for subsistence purposes. So that kind of, showed the state and federal agencies that natives had used every part of Southeast. I retired in 2000, but our final product at the time included a booklet with an atlas, and Tom included a disc in there where you put your cursor on a certain name, it pronounces the name, the correct pronunciation, and it tells the meaning of the name, and certain things that belong to certain clans. I retired in 2000, or I tried to retire. People warned me about it. They said, you're going to be doing the same things, you just won't get paid for it. So that's what's been happening to me. I'm still involved. One of the things I liked about Tom's original approach was that he likened the Tlingit place names to at.oow. He called it linguistic artifacts. With that, I'll cut it off here. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you very much. My name is Bambi Kraus, and my Tlingit name is Keet. And actually, I had asked my mom last night, told me, she goes, you know, you're going to have to introduce yourself in the following way. And she spoke Tlingit to me, and it was a very long thing. And I said, you know what, I need to learn Tlingit. I know that. I want to devote the time to it. And if you wanted to introduce me this morning, Mom, I'd be happy to let you introduce me. She's actually in the room selling the children's book that I did, and that was a great little project. And the book is about my mother and her life, and her granddaughter, Marissa, who's now 21. And the book, she was 12. And so those two are in that room, and they're just having a great time talking to people. Again, I am Bambi Kraus, and I work in Washington, D.C., which is in another world away from where we are today. And I head up the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. And it's a very long title, and it's a technical capacity because the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers have assumed the responsibilities for historic preservation in their local communities. And it might be technical in nature, but the bottom line is that currently the state has a lot of jurisdiction over your tribal communities. So several Alaska villages have come to my attention. They've come to, Washington, D.C., and they said that we have place name projects, we have native language programs, we're doing Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act programs in our local communities, and yet we're not getting the recognition that we deserve because of our legal rights. So what I do is a very legal job because we're trying to get the tribal communities to have official control over what's going on in historic preservation in their local community. And currently the state has, again, a lot of say on what goes on up here in the state of Alaska. And so I was hoping to just get that brief announcement out because I'll be doing a session tomorrow to give you more information on it. But there's a legal program that allows each Alaska Native village to do a lot more in historic preservation so that it's your legal right to do this. So that's my brief announcement, and I can give more information then, but I just wanted to take that short announcement time now. So thank you very much.
This next presenter is the reason why I'm famous and well known. He's another person that needs no introduction. Kakwask.
Thanks, Dad. Thank you so much for having me. There's part of what I think the only reason I should have a platform like this is many people in this room. So I wanted to just acknowledge a lot of the elders and elders in training in this room, and forgive me if I miss anybody. Richard and Nora Dauenhauer, Gach Lane, Paul Jackson, Marie Olson, Selena Everson, Ethel Lund, Ray Wilson, Nancy, Kitty, Eddy, Shgen George, Hans Chester, Mary Folletti, Nels Lawson, my Auntie Kathy, Hope Erickson, Walter Porter, David Hunsker and Annie Calkins, and Clarissa, Hudson, and Jean Lampy, Ted Wright, and my father Andy. And there's many more, Lillian Peter Shore, there's many more people here in this room who have touched my life and supported me and helped me do my dreams. And this is just to show the really dense network. TJ, Tommy, Jimmy. As I look out in the audience, I'm gonna just shout out names. There's a dense network going at place here. And I think that's what place-based education is about. It's creating that dense network and recognizing, your cousin, your brother, someone, next door can help you, can educate you, and can help with your career and your knowledge. I'm here to talk a little bit about, yes, place-based education, but also I think you could call it place-based profession. That even outside of the university system, even outside of the K through 12 school districts, there's still a chance to become a lifelong learner. If you're creative enough, if you go for the grants, if you have enough of a dense network of support, as this room is capable of having, you can actually make a little bit of a living. And I wanted to mention that because I think it's very important. I don't think I'm out to get rich off the culture. I don't think anyone here is out to get rich off the culture. However, I think there's a way to use a culture so that it's not just, it doesn't have to just become a hobby. It's an all-day thing. And that's been my passion for the past couple of years, of making my culture an all-day experience. And you gotta make a living too in order to do that, in order to have the time. So it's finding creative ways, I think, in order to make that happen. So I wanted to start off with talking a little bit about my work with Perseverance Theater. I'm the director of outreach at Perseverance Theater. I do acting and storytelling and directing, and most recently I want to become a playwright, and have had a chance to do work recently with the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. I'm planning and organizing the 6th annual Beyond Heritage, which a gifted storyteller in the back there, Bob Sam, he helped create this event with me in its starting. So Bob really helped put it helped get it started and get it going and make it something that can last over the years. It's a festival that celebrates traditional and contemporary Alaska Native culture, performance, with emphasis on performance, which includes storytelling, poetry, theater, film, and even one of those years I got a young Tlingit rapper So, and he was great. So I hope to get him back. John White's his name. And what this year's focus of Beyond Heritage is going to be is pairing storytellers and elders with youth. I'm looking at focusing from ages 12 to 16 and having a retreat where these elders just tell the stories to the youth. And the youth listen, and then we also do some activities, some things that get the youth to build their confidence, icebreakers, theater games, put them a little bit on the center stage. And then at the end of this retreat, what we hope to have is the youth receives permission and decides to tell one of the stories that have been told over the course of that weekend. And then over the next 2 weeks after that, they would then perform those stories along with the elders and the storytellers for the performances of Beyond Heritage. And so this will happen. I'm still trying to figure out the schedule. It looks like it's going to be late May, early June in Juneau. And so I wanted to mention that because that's, if you know students in that age range, if you want to be a part of something like this, if you have any interest whatsoever, even as an audience member, please, I would love to meet you, talk with you, and try to make it happen. I know sometimes you have to work a little extra hard to get students' interest. And so I'm willing to go and go into their classroom and call them up, whatever I need to do in order to spark the potential of some of those students, because that happened to me when I was in a junior in high school. I got shamed, basically. I was told, if you don't do this storytelling, you'll be letting down your people. And then I hung up the phone and I was, I don't know, maybe a little offended, a little surprised, but then I thought about it for 2 seconds and picked the phone right back up. One of the most important decisions of my life. And another couple of the projects with Perseverance Theater is, Perseverance Theater is a theater that's a professional not-for-profit theater in Juneau. That was founded by artistic director Molly Smith in 1979. And we do, it's a theater that's based around Alaskan artists, native and non-native. And we've had many projects over the years that focus on native, including Beyond Heritage, including Yupik Antigone, which Mr. Hunsaker led and ended up traveling even to Europe in the 80s. And a project that I was a part of called Moby Dick that was based on both melding Herman Melville's novel with that of a Inupiaq whaling culture and putting that all together. And that was in 2001. And most recently, as my father mentioned, we took a version of Macbeth that was translated about 60 to 70% in Tlingit. And we had a young cast, ages 15 to 42, that learned how to pronounce the language. It was a big project that was led mostly by Nora's brother, Johnny Marks, who translated it and got the editing support of Carrie Edwards, a linguist at Sealaska Heritage, June Pegues, Helen Sarabia, and Anita Lafferty. And so I sat down with Johnny. Here's place-based education right there. I sat down with Johnny as he was going through it and translating it, translating the Shakespeare into the Tlingit. And when he was stumped, he would, when he had a little harder time translating something, I would offer my small, meager suggestion. Oh, why don't you try to translate, like this, giving the help with the English, so the English is more, becomes more easier for him to then convert it into Tlingit. And then I sat with him as he pronounced it and recorded over a digital recording. And then what you had was a cast that, with the exception of Lance Twitchell, who is just an amazing, amazing young man who has many, many gifts to share. He's already been mentioned a couple times today. Who, with the exception of Lance Twitchell, everyone in this cast were beginner Tlingits. Some of them very, very beginner, and some of them who may be able to pronounce and not quite put together a sentence. Maybe they could say a couple things. And it was a gigantic task. There's so many complicated sounds in the Tlingit language, and we all really sat together, sat with Lance, with Carrie, and worked out pronouncing it to the best that we could. Admittedly, the elders came, Nora came, Anita came, Helen came and saw us, and they appreciated it. It was really good. I mean, they liked it. But we asked them, did you know what we were saying? Did you know what was going on? Not all the time. So, but that's a part of the support network that I'm talking about. What we need, I think, are people who. I think when you talk about a dense social web, a dense network of people working together, people are bound to step on each other's toes. People are bound to make mistakes, bound to offend each other. And my hope is that we have that resilience and emotional intelligence and social skills to all really work together and work beyond any of those things that might happen, any of those jealousies or hurt feelings or anything that might happen in such a tight web of people, such a small community. The other thing I wanted to mention was talk a little bit about this little comic here. I know, forgive me, there are some elders who may not have the best vision to see this. What it is a comic book based on the at.oow story, the strongman story. And this is told alongside the challenges and struggles of a young high school Tlingit. And it's also being sold out in the that room over there with my brother Chris. My brother Chris is selling that. But in order to, I think this may be an example of what research and what acknowledgement of clans and what ultimately trying to be creative as an artist, combining all those things together may be. I didn't do this alone. I wrote this, and it was drawn by the Athabascan artist Dimi Macheras of Anchorage. And in order to do this, I learned a lot of lessons in protocol, in acknowledgement, in really putting the clan above the self. I talked with my father and Harold Jacobs about where the at.oow story may originate from. And I think the story is told all over the place. Many, many people claim it. There's not one place that you can authoritatively say this is exactly where it's from, or at least that I know. I may be wrong in this. But where we were led just by advice from my father and from Robbie Littlefield and from Harold, were to Elizabeth Catas, the late elder of the Dauenhaur clan. And just before her passing, she gave me amazing advice really, and support and help in publishing this. Also, this is based largely on clan relatives, the Suktin Eddy version told by Frank Johnson that was published in Dick and Nora's book, Hashuka. And also, where I've been led to that may be where this clan originates is the Deshitan, the Ganach Tedi, the Ganachadi, and the Kakwedi. And so those are where I've been led to. And also, I'm sure there are many other versions. I've heard of an amazing version told by Nels Lawson over here. I've heard amazing versions told by Lyle James of Huna. But this is the particular version that we worked with, and the particular clans that we worked with. So I just wanted to close with that was a lot of lessons I learned, and there are probably many mistakes that we still made. However, it's important to receive the support, the love, and the care to work through our mistakes and to try to create the best thing that we can. Gunashish, thank you very much.